The rays of the kind morning sun rising over the horizon greatly lifted the mood of the conscript standing like a statue at the guardhouse located on the territory of a small military unit lost among the dense taiga near the Sea of Japan. Soon the soldier will be replaced, which means that he can at least get some sleep before the sergeant's thunderous roar wakes him up, urging him to steadfastly endure all the hardships and deprivations of all those who serve the debt to the motherland. True, Brian did not know how much he owed and for what merits, but one way or another he went to the military unit with pleasure, especially since he was assigned to the airborne troops. The elite, after all. He will be able to brag about it to girls later in civilian life. True, military service is not a very fashionable thing these days, but that's for those who don't understand how important it is to stand guard over the fatherland. That's what the ordinary soldier was thinking. When Brian was already walking to the barracks, at the gates he saw Lieutenant Johnson, the commander of their platoon. The soldier even shed a sparse, manly tear for him. He felt so much sympathy and anxiety for Chris Johnson, because his whole career was still ahead of him. He had just graduated from the military school this year and came to their company, but hadn't even served a few months before being discharged with a wolf ticket for health reasons. The commander was leaving like a hero, but now the service was over for him, as was any work for the young man under doctor's strict prohibition. All because of the injury he sustained while rescuing a child from a fire. The lieutenant was gloomier than the clouds, of course. No summer sunshine could delight him. Today, after spending 3 long months in the hospital, he came to the native unit for the last time to collect his belongings and go to live out his days in a remote village. There he had the only property left to him by inheritance from his grandmother who died long ago. Chris was a complete orphan. The army was his only family. His parents died when he was still little, so his grandmother Mary raised him until he expressed a desire to go to Suvorov Military School. And now she too had passed away, leaving her grandson completely alone. Seeing the lieutenant, the soldier briskly greeted him with a salute and said, "I wish you good health, Comrade Lieutenant." "What good health? You can see that now the only thing I can shoot from is this stick, and tomorrow everyone is going on maneuvers. I'm the only one left out of the helicopter," the commander replied despondently. Hard as Chris tried, he couldn't hide his disappointment and mood from his subordinate, afraid he might start sobbing uncontrollably in front of him. Leaning heavily on a cane, the man hobbled away. Near the headquarters, he met the captain of his company, Smith. That man was evil and heartless, and probably the only one in their unit happy about the disaster that had befallen the lieutenant. The thing was that his subordinate was not only young, but also incredibly proactive. As they say, he constantly poked his nose where it didn't belong, constantly questioning the captain's valiant merits and abilities. Of course, no boss likes it when a subordinate, and a whippersnapper at that, is an order of magnitude smarter than such a hardened paratrooper as himself. True, Smith had been a captain for a little too long, thanks to numerous misconducts and a penchant for alcohol. Everyone at the unit already whispered that the leadership would soon swap their places, which for the senior officer was tantamount to death. That's why the brave warrior was glad that fate itself eliminated the competitor. However, seeing the lieutenant, the scoundrel beamed like a brass penny. Running up to him, he even slapped the poor man on the shoulder, saying at the same time, "Well, Johnny, I see you've come for a ticket home. Congratulations. Now you'll be lying on the stove in your village. Beauty, nature. And maybe the fresh air there will cure you, and you'll come back to us. Don't worry about the disability they gave you. That's nonsense." My grandfather had a stroke and lay flat for several months after that. The doctors gave him no chance, but then suddenly he got up from his bed. He still runs around to this day. But now you are a real hero. So what if you got injured not in the line of duty but on your way to it? That doesn't diminish your service to the fatherland. At least you didn't pass by someone else's trouble. You pulled the girl out of the burning house. Like a red-hot iron applied to his cheek, the memories from 3 months ago burned Johnny. On that early morning, like today, he was walking to work, leaving the dormitory for single men. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. Everything was going on as usual. The lieutenant had already covered half the way to the military unit, walking past the village, when he saw a thick pillar of smoke rising above one of the houses. Looking closely, Johnny saw that the roof of the old shack was already engulfed in flames, and a 10-year-old boy was running around near the house, repeatedly trying to rush inside the building. There were no adults around. Only an old woman with a cane could be seen in the distance, but she was hardly any help. At best, she had called the fire department. This was not a surprising thing because this village, like almost all similar settlements in the country, was dying out. Only a few huts remained, inhabited mainly by old people. Without hesitation, the lieutenant rushed to the burning house. Seeing the adult, the boy immediately began shouting to him that his little sister was still in the house. There wasn't a second to spare. The fire had not yet reached the back part of the house where the nursery was, but the entrance to the house was already blazing with flames. In a minute, there might be no one left to rescue from trouble, so the paratrooper did what his conscience and duty to the motherland told him because he swore he would protect ordinary peaceful citizens. Here before him, there was a cunning and dangerous enemy that could warm you up, but if you played with it, a little warm fire could turn into a huge, unstoppable flame. That's what children's games with matches can lead to. While the flames had not yet raged violently, Johnny knocked out the window with a brick and, putting a water-soaked rag to his mouth, jumped into the smoke-filled room. Groping his way along the wall, he barely managed to see the baby crib, in which a little girl was hiding under a blanket. He heard her coughing from the tearful, caustic smoke. Grabbing the child and wrapping the baby in a blanket, the officer rushed to the window, but the fire blocked his way. The hero jumped out into the corridor as fast as the smoke inhalation and advancing fire that burned his face and hands unbearably would allow him. With incredible willpower, he reached the saving window. Knocking out the glass with a stool standing nearby, Johnny threw the precious burden out of the opening, after which he also climbed into it himself. Only at that very moment, a burning beam with a sharp spike protruding from it fell on him from above and pierced his body like a dagger. Already losing consciousness from the pain and burns, the hero crawled outside, coming around only to the hospital. Of course, he received a medal and a letter of commendation from the fire department and the parents of the girl he had saved for his heroism at the fire. Only there was no use for the military man, as his further career was given a fat cross, as was the rest of his life, because as the doctors told him, people don't live long with such internal organ injuries. While his body is still young, it can somehow cope, and even then he will have to go to the hospital every 6 months. But soon the resources will run out, and the burns don't exactly embellish his body either. And of course, the newly minted cripple didn't have money for plastic surgery. Johnny scolded himself for not having built his own family while rescuing someone else's. Well, what the hell? At least I didn't ruin another family, even though I haven't built my own. I'll live out however long they gave me, and that's it, the man thought, holding his aching side, into which the ill-fated spike had gone. The first thing Johnny did was bring at least some semblance of order to the house, because while it was still warm, he intended to live in it so as not to inconvenience the neighbor with his presence, although she persistently invited him to her place. The former paratrooper walked around the rooms, clearing them of last year's leaves and debris from the collapsed roof, pieces of slate and wood, when he was surprised to see an oddly sagging wooden floor in the corner of the hall. Coming closer, he saw that it was a neatly camouflaged entrance to a basement. Under the boards, there was a secret square door with a padlock. "What kind of St. Petersburg mysteries are these?" the young man muttered in surprise as he went to the shed for a tool. After breaking the lock and going down into the basement, his surprise only increased because he discovered many jars of various ointments and dried herbs, as well as detailed manuscripts describing when and for what diseases to use them. It was an incredibly strange find. And when he lived there was no basement here. He knew that for sure. Nothing could be hidden from an ever-present boy, especially a passion for alternative medicine from his grandmother, a simple farm milkmaid. With curiosity, Johnny examined the vials, seeing in one of them herbs for healing internal organs and ointment for treating burns. It turns out there was a whole pharmacy here. Climbing out of the basement, the first thing the man did was go to Grandma Alice, his neighbor, to share his discovery with her. But it seems it didn't make much of an impression on the old woman, at least regarding the fact that there was such a secret room under the house. "Oh, that's Pete's doing. After you left for the academy, this strange, bearded man appeared in our village. He kept whispering prayers to himself and asking for lodging. He didn't remember anything about himself, and his belongings were just a large bag with various remedies that he collected himself in the fields, and then he prepared healing infusions and ointments. I was afraid to let him into my house. Who knows what kind of con artist he might be? But Alice took pity on the homeless man and sheltered him. I remember he was always afraid that the authorities would come and take him away like they took his grandfather in the 30s. That's the only thing Pete could remember about himself. That's probably why he dug that basement. He lived at your grandma's for 5 years while you didn't visit her even once during that time. You only wrote letters, and even those less and less often. But youth today is all the same. When Alice died, her lodger left that very day. I think he wasn't just a witch doctor, but perhaps a doctor as well. Only under what circumstances he forgot everything about himself and why he was not in his right mind is known only to God now. However, his remedies were strong. I've been suffering from an ulcer for so many years, but he gave me an herbal infusion to drink. A month later, I went to the clinic, and all the doctors were practically fainting. They convened a panel because my illness was gone, concluded the old woman. Johnny pondered her words, deciding that it wouldn't get any worse. He was dying anyway. So that same evening, he made himself a decoction according to the instructions, and also smeared himself with burn ointment. A year has passed. Eternal Captain Smith, unsteadily standing on his feet, threatening with good profanity in the headquarters that he would surely tear everyone to shreds if they didn't reinstate him. The patience of the unit commander ran out, so he forced the officer to write a report on the early termination of the contract, otherwise threatening to retire him for other reasons. The captain thought the commander would cool off soon. There was no one to replace him after all. But when the brave warrior saw his former subordinate, Lieutenant Johnson, with shoulder marks again, entering the commander's office, he almost went mad. However, not only Smith was very surprised, but also the medical board. Because the young officer had fully regained his lost health, even the burns left only a few minor scars. All this from simple herbs, though in the right proportions, so the paratrooper claimed, demanding reinstatement for military service. Johnny was over the moon with happiness because now the meaning of life had returned to him, and his career was advancing rapidly. The military certainly needs such servicemen. Heroes who don't think about themselves, ready to shield the civilian population with their chests. Now there was only one thing Johnny dreamed of, to find that strange bearded man and bow to his feet. And soon his dream came true. Subscribe to our channel and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one.